Greetings, listeners. We're back, once again, to talk to you about the Cthulhu mythos, its books, its monsters, its unfortunate human casualties, its timeline in general, and even its tangential bits, like the Dreamlands, or things of a weird nature, or things that are Lovecraftian leaning, weird fiction, science fiction, horror, learn of terrible meetings in lonely places, of cyclopean ruins and vast staircases that lead down to abysses of nighted secrets, of complex angles that lead through invisible walls to other regions of space and time, and of hideous explorations in remote and forbidden places, on other worlds, and in different time-space continua. From the creation of our galaxy to the death of the sun, this is an exploration of the Cthulhu mythos from the perspective of humans' concept of history. We are the People's Guide to the Cthulhu mythos. You can find us at pgttcm.com, pgttcm.podbean.com, and you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. The People's Guide to the Cthulhu mythos starts now.
The People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos. Season 8.
Greetings and welcome to The People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos. I am your host, D.B. Spitzer, and between episodes, 107 and 134, we will be talking about The Beetle. The Beetle, a Mystery, is a 1897 horror novel by British writer Richard Marsh. To tell you about it is to spoil it. So check it out, and that'll be going on from now until sometime in December. This episode is brought to you by FoundOutOnClothing.com and BunnySlippers.com. Subscribe to PGTTCM with DB Spitzer and Seraphy. Wherever you subscribe to podcasts, we prefer Podbean and Apple Podcasts. Check out the new website over at pgttcm.com and check out the merch table over at pgttcm.threadless.com. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at PGTTCM, or check us out on YouTube at People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos. Edited by Daniel Spitzer. Music by Kevin MacLeod featuring The Hive, Ghost Story, Ghost Processional, Oppressive, Gloom, and our theme song, The Chamber.
Chapter 35, A Bringer of Tidings. Atherton did not wait to see who might or might not be present, but, without even pausing to take breath, he broke into full cry on the instant, as is occasionally his wont. "Champ Nell, thank goodness I found you in. I want you, at once. Don't stop to talk, but stick your hat on and put your best foot forward. I'll tell you all about it in the cab." I endeavored to call his attention to Mr. Lessingham's presence, but without success. "My dear fellow." When I had got as far as that, he cut me short. "Don't dear fellow me, none of your jabber. And none of your excuses either. I don't care if you've got an engagement with the Queen. You'll have to chuck it. Where's that dashed hat of yours? Or are you going without it? Don't I tell you that every second cut to waste may mean the difference between life and death? Do you want me to drag you down to the cab by the hair of your head? I will try not to constrain you to quite so drastic a resource. And I was coming to you at once in any case. I only want to call your attention to the fact that I am not alone. Here is Mr. Lessingham." In his harum-scarum haste, Mr. Lessingham had gone unnoticed. Now that his observation was particularly directed to him, Atherton started, turned, and glared at my latest client in a fashion which was scarcely flattering. "Oh, it's you, is it? What the deuce are you doing here?" Before Lessingham could reply to this most unceremonious query, Atherton, rushing forward, gripped him by the arm. "Have you seen her?" Lessingham, not unnaturally nonplussed by the other's curious conduct, stared at him in unmistakable amazement. "Have I seen whom?" "Marjorie Linden." "Marjorie Linden?" Lessingham paused. He was evidently asking himself what the inquiry meant. "I have not seen Miss London since last night. Why do you ask?" "Then heaven help us! As I am a living man, I believe he, she, or it has got her." His words were incomprehensible enough to stand in copious need of explanation, as Mr. Lessingham plainly thought. "What is it that you mean, sir?" "What I say, I believe that Oriental friend of yours has got her in her clutches, if it is a her. Goodness alone knows what the infernal conjurer's real sex may be." "Atherton, explain yourself!" On a sudden, Lessingham's tone rang out like a trumpet call. "If damage comes to her, I shall be fit to cut my throat, and yours." Mr. Lessingham's next proceeding surprised me. I imagine it surprised Atherton still more. Springing at Sidney like a tiger, he caught him by the throat. You hound! Of what wretched folly have you been guilty? If so much as a hair of her head is injured, you shall repay it me 10,000-fold. You mischief-making, intermeddling, jealous fool!" He shook Sidney as if he had been a rat, then flung him from him headlong onto the floor. It reminded me of nothing so much as Othello's treatment of Iago. Never had I seen a man so transformed by rage. Lessingham seemed to have positively increased in stature. As he stood glowering down at the prostrate Sidney, he might have stood for a materialistic conception of human retribution. Sidney, I take it, was rather surprised than hurt. For a moment or two he lay quite still. Then, lifting his head, he looked up his assailant. Then, raising himself to his feet, he shook himself, as if with a view of learning all his bones were whole. Putting his hands up to his neck, he rubbed it gently, and he grinned. "By God, Lessingham, there is more in you than I thought. After all, you are a man. There's some holding power in those wrists of yours. They've nearly broken my neck. When this business is finished, I should like to put on the gloves with you and fight it out. You're clean wasted upon politics. Damn it, man, give me your hand." Mr. Lessingham did not give him his hand. Atherton took it and gave it a hearty shake with both of his. If the first paroxysm of his passion had passed, Lessingham was still sufficiently stern. "Be so good as not to trifle, Mr. Atherton. If what you say is correct, and the wretch to whom you allude really has Miss Linden at her mercy, then the woman I love, and whom you also pretend to love, stands in imminent peril not only of a ghastly death, but of what is infinitely worse than death." "The deuce she does!" Atherton wheeled round towards me. "Champnell, haven't you got that dashed hat of yours yet? Don't stand there like a tailor's dummy, keeping me on tenterhooks. Move yourself. I'll tell you all about it in the cab. And Lessingham, if you'll come with us, I'll tell you too." End of chapter 35. Chapter 36. What the tidings were. 3 in a hansom cab is not, under all circumstances, the most comfortable method of conveyance. When one of the trio happens to be Sidney Atherton in one of his moments of excitement, it is distinctly the opposite, as on that occasion Mr. Lessingham and I both quickly found. Sometimes he sat on my knees, sometimes on Lessingham's, and frequently when he unexpectedly stood up, and all but precipitated himself onto the horse's back, on nobody's. In the eagerness of his gesticulations, first he knocked off my hat, then he knocked off Lessingham's, then his own, then all three together. Once, his own hat rolling into the mud, he sprang into the road without previously going through the empty form of advising the driver of his intention to pick it up. When he turned to speak to Lessingham, he thrust his elbow into my eye, and when he turned to speak to me, he thrust it into Lessingham's. Never for one solitary instant was he at rest, or either of us at ease. The wonder is that the gymnastics in which he incessantly indulged did not sufficiently attract public notice to induce a policeman to put at least a momentary period to our progress. Had speed not been of primary importance, I should have insisted on the transference of the expedition to the somewhat wider limits of a four-wheeler. His elucidation of the causes of his agitation was apparently more comprehensible to Lessingham than it was to me. I had to piece this and that together under considerable difficulties. By degrees I did arrive at something like a clear notion of what had actually taken place. He commenced by addressing Lessingham, and thrusting his elbow into my eye. "Did Marjorie tell you about the fellow she found in the street?" Up went his arm to force the trap-door open overhead, and off went my hat. "Now then, William Henry, let her go. If you kill the horse, I'll buy you another." We were already going much faster than legally we ought to have done, but that seemingly to him was not a matter of the slightest consequence. Lessingham replied to his inquiry. She did not. You know the fellow I saw coming out of your drawing-room window? Yes. Well, Marjorie found him the morning after in front of her breakfast-room window, in the middle of the street. Seems he had been wandering about all night unclothed, in the rain and the mud and all the rest of it, in a condition of hypnotic trance. Who is the gentleman you are alluding to? Says his name's Holt, Robert Holt. Holt? Is he an Englishman? Very much so. City quill driver out of a shop. Stony Brook, absolutely. Got the chuck from the casual ward, wouldn't let him in, houseful and that sort of thing. Poor devil. Pretty passes you politicians bring men to. Are you sure? Of what? Are you sure that this man, Robert Holt, is the same person whom, as you put it, you saw coming out of my drawing-room window? Sure, of course I'm sure. Think I didn't recognize him? Besides, there was the man's own tale, owned to it himself, besides all the rest, which sent one rushing Fulham way. You must remember, Mr. Atherton, that I am wholly in the dark as to what happened. What has the man, Holt, to do with the errand on which we are bound? Am I not coming to it? If you would let me tell the tale in my own way, I should get there in less than no time, but you will keep on cutting in. How the deuce do you suppose Champnell is to make head or tail of the business if you will persist in interrupting? Marjorie took the beggar in. He told his tale to her. She sent for me. That was just now. Caught me on the steps after I'd been lunching with Dora Grayling. Holt redished his yarn. I smelt a rat, saw that a connection possibly existed between the thief who'd been playing confounded conjuring tricks off onto me and this interesting party down Fulham Way. What party down Fulham Way? This friend of Holt's. Am I not telling you? There you are, you see. Won't let me finish. When Holt slipped through the window, which is the most sensible thing he seems to have done, if I'd been in his shoes, I'd have slipped through 40 windows. Dusky-colored charmer caught him on the hop, doctored him, sent him out to commit burglary by deputy. I said to Holt, "Show us this agreeable little crib, young man." Holt was game. Then Marjorie chipped in. She wanted to go and see it too. I said, "You'll be sorry if you do." That settled it. After that, she'd have gone if she'd died. I never did have a persuasive way with women. So off we toddled, Marjorie, Holt, and I, in a growler. Spotted the crib in less than no time, invited ourselves in by the kitchen window. House seemed empty. Presently, Holt became hypnotized before my eyes. The best established case of hypnotism by suggestion I ever yet encountered. Started off on a pilgrimage of one. Like an idiot, I followed, leaving Marjorie to wait for me. Alone? Alone. Am I not telling you? Great Scott, Lessingham, in the House of Commons they must be hazy to think you smart. I said I'll send the first sane soul I meet to keep you company. As luck would have it, I never met one. Only kids and a baker who wouldn't leave his cart, or take it with him either. I'd covered pretty nearly 2 miles before I came across a peeler, and when I did, the man was cracked, and he thought me mad or drunk, or both. By the time I'd got myself within nodding distance of being run in for obstructing the police in the execution of their duty, without inducing him to move a single one of his 24-inch feet, Holt was out of sight. So, since all my pains in his direction were clean thrown away, there was nothing left for me but to scurry back to Marjorie. So I scurried, and I found the house empty, no one there, and Marjorie gone. But I don't quite follow. Atherton impetuously declined to allow Mr. Lessingham to conclude. Of course you don't quite follow, and you'll follow still less if you will keep getting in front. I went upstairs and downstairs, inside and out, shouted myself hoarse as a crow. Nothing was to be seen of Marjorie, or heard, until I was coming down the stairs for about the 55th time. I stepped on something hard which was lying in the passage. I picked it up. It was a ring, this ring. Its shape is not just what it was. I'm not as light as gossamer, especially when I come jumping downstairs 6 at a time. But what's left of it is here. Sidney held something in front of him. Mr. Lessingham wriggled it to one side to enable him to see. Then he made a snatch at it. "It's mine." Sidney dodged it out of his reach. "What do you mean it's yours?" "It's the ring I gave Marjorie for an engagement ring. Give it me, you hound, unless you wish me to do you violence in the cab." With complete disregard of the limitations of space, or of my comfort, Lessingham thrust him vigorously aside. Then, gripping Sidney by the wrist, he seized the gaud, Sidney yielding it just in time to save himself from being precipitated into the street. Ravished of his treasure, Sidney turned and surveyed the ravisher with something like a glance of admiration. "Hang me, Lessingham, if I don't believe there is some warm blood in those fish-like veins of yours. Please the piper, I'll live to fight you after all. With the bare ones, sir, as a gentleman should do." Lessingham seemed to pay no attention to him whatever. He was surveying the ring, which Sidney had trampled out of shape, with looks of the deepest concern. "Marjorie's ring, the one I gave her. Something serious must have happened to her before she would have dropped my ring and left it lying where it fell." Atherton went on. "That's it. What has happened to her? I'll be dashed if I know. When it was clear that there she wasn't, I tore off to find out where she was. Came across old Linden. He knew nothing. I rather fancy I startled him in the middle of Pall Mall. When I left, he stared after me like one possessed, and his hat was lying in the gutter. Went home, she wasn't there. Asked Dora Grayling, she'd seen nothing of her. No one had seen anything of her. She had vanished into air. Then I said to myself, you're a first-class idiot, on my honor. While you're looking for her like a lost sheep, the betting is that the girl's in Holt's friend's house the whole jolly time. When you were there, the chances are that she'd just stepped out for a stroll, and that now she's back again, and wondering where on earth you've gone. So I made up my mind that I'd fly back and see, because the idea of her standing on the front doorstep looking for me, while I was going off my nut looking for her, commended itself to what I call my sense of humor. And on my way it struck me that it would be the part of wisdom to pick up Champnell, because if there is a man who can be back to find a needle in any amount of haystacks, it is the great Augustus. That horse has moved itself after all, because here we are. Now, cabman, don't go driving further on. You'll have to put a girdle round the earth if you do, because you'll have to reach this point again before you get your fare. This is the magician's house. End of chapter 36. Chapter 37. What was hidden under the floor. The cab pulled up in front of a tumble-down cheap villa in an unfinished cheap neighborhood. The whole place a living monument of the defeat of the speculative builder. Atherton leaped out onto the grass-grown rubble, which was meant for a footpath. I don't see Marjorie looking for me on the doorstep. Nor did I. I saw nothing but what appeared to be an unoccupied ramshackle brick abomination. Suddenly, Sidney gave an exclamation. "Hello! The front door's closed." I was hard at his heels. "What do you mean?" "Why, when I left the front door open. It looks as if I've made an idiot of myself after all, and Marjorie's returned. Let's hope to goodness that I have." He knocked. While we waited for a response, I questioned him. "Why did you leave the door open when you went?" "I hardly know. I imagine that it was with some dim idea of Marjorie's being able to get in if she returned while I was absent. But the truth is I was in such a condition of helter-skelter that I am not prepared to swear that I had any reasonable reason. I suppose there is no doubt that you did leave it open?" "Absolutely none. On that I'll stake my life." "Was it open when you returned from your pursuit of Holt?" "Wide open. I walked straight in expecting to find her waiting for me in the front room. I was struck all of a heap when I found she wasn't there." "Were there any signs of a struggle?" "None. There were no signs of anything. Everything was just as I had left it, with the exception of the ring which I trod on in the passage, and which Lessingham has. If Miss Linden has returned, it does not look as if she were in the house at present." It did not, unless silence had such meaning. Atherton had knocked loudly 3 times without succeeding in attracting the slightest notice from within. It strikes me that this is another case of seeking admission through that hospitable window at the back. Atherton led the way to the rear. Lessingham and I followed. There was not even an apology for a yard, still less a garden. There was not even a fence of any sort to serve as an enclosure, and to shut off the house from the wilderness of wasteland. The kitchen window was open. I asked Sidney if they had left it so. I don't know. I dare say we did. I don't fancy that either of us stood on the order of his coming. While he spoke, he scrambled over the sill. We followed. When he was in, he shouted at the top of his voice, "Marjorie, Marjorie! Speak to me, Marjorie! It is I, Sidney!" The words echoed through the house. Only silence answered. He led the way to the front room. Suddenly he stopped. "Hello," he cried. "The blind's down." I had noticed when we were outside that the blind was down at the front room window. It was up when I went, that I'll swear. That someone has been here is pretty plain. Let's hope it's Marjorie. He'd only taken a step forward into the room when he again stopped short to exclaim, "My stars, here's a sudden clearance. Why, the place is empty. Everything's clean gone." "What do you mean? Was it furnished when you left?" "The room was empty enough then." "Furnished? I don't know that it was exactly what you'd call furnished. The party who ran this establishment had a taste in upholstery which was all his own. But there was a carpet, and a bed, and lots of things. For the most part, I should have said distinctly Eastern curiosities. They seem to have evaporated into smoke, which may be a way which is common enough among Eastern curiosities, though it's queer to me." Atherton was staring about him as if he found it difficult to credit the evidence of his own eyes. "How long ago is it since you left?" He referred to his watch. "Something over an hour, possibly an hour and a half. I couldn't swear to the exact moment, but it certainly isn't more." "Did you notice any signs of packing up?" "Not a sign." Going to the window, he drew up the blind, speaking as he did so. "The queer thing about this business is that when we first got in, this blind wouldn't draw up a little bit. So, since it wouldn't go up, I pulled it down, roller and all. Now it draws up as easily and smoothly as if it had always been the best blind that ever lived." Standing at Sidney's back, I saw that the cabman on his box was signaling to us with his outstretched hand. Sidney perceived him too. He threw up the sash. "What's the matter with you?" "Excuse me, sir, but who's the old gent?" "What old gent?" "Why, the old gent peeping through the window of the room upstairs." The words were hardly out of the driver's mouth when Sidney was through the door and flying up the staircase. I followed rather more soberly. His methods were a little too flighty for me. When I reached the landing, dashing out of the front room, he rushed into the one at the back, then through a door at the side. He came out shouting, "What's the idiot mean with his old gent? I'd old gent him if I got him. There's not a creature about the place." He returned into the front room, I at his heels. It certainly was empty, and not only empty, but it showed no traces of recent occupation. The dust lay thick upon the floor. There was that moldy, earthy smell which is so frequently found in apartments which have been long untenanted. "Are you sure, Atherton, that there is no one at the back?" "Of course I'm sure. You can go see for yourself if you like." "You think I'm blind?" Jay was drunk. Throwing up the sash, he addressed the driver. "What do you mean with your old gent at the window? What window?" "That window, sir." "Go to! You're dreaming, man. There's no one here." "Begging your pardon, sir, but there was someone there not a minute ago." "Imagination, cabman. The slant of the light on the glass, or your eyesight's defective." "Excuse me, sir, but it's not my imagination, and my eyesight's as good as any man's in England. And as for the slant of the light on the glass, there ain't much glass for the light to slant on. I saw him peeping through that bottom broken pane on your left hand as plainly as I see you. He must be somewhere about. He can't have got away. He's at the back. Ain't there a cupboard nor nothing where he could hide?" The cabman's manner was so extremely earnest that I went myself to see. There was a cupboard on the landing, but the door of that stood wide open, and that obviously was bare. The room behind was small, and, despite the splintered glass in the window frame, stuffy. Fragments of glass kept company with the dust on the floor, together with a choice collection of stones, brickbats, and other missiles, which not improbably were the cause of their being there. In the corner stood a cupboard, but a momentary examination showed that that was as bare as the other. The door at the side, which Sidney had left wide open, opened onto a closet, and that was empty. I glanced up. There was no trapdoor which led to the roof. No practicable nook or cranny in which a living being could lie concealed was anywhere at hand. I returned to Sidney's shoulder to tell the cabman so. There is no place in which anyone could hide, and there is no one in either of the rooms. You must have been mistaken, driver. The man waxed wroth. Don't tell me. How could I come to think I saw something when I didn't? One's eyes are apt to play us tricks. How could you see what wasn't there? That's what I want to know. As I drove up, before you told me to stop, I saw him looking through the window, the one at which you are. He'd got his nose glued to the broken pane and was staring as hard as he could stare. When I pulled off he started. I saw him get up off his knees and go to the back of the room. When the gentleman took to knocking, back he came, to the same old spot, and flopped down on his knees. I didn't know what caper you was up to. You might be bum bailiffs for all I knew, and I suppose that he wasn't so anxious to let you in as you might be to get inside. And that was why he didn't take no notice of your knocking, while all the while he kept an eye on what was going on. When you goes round to the back, up he gets again. And I reckoned that he was going to meet you and perhaps give you a bit of his mind, and that presently I should hear a shindy, or that something would happen. But when you pulls up the blind downstairs, to my surprise, back he comes once more. He shoves his old nose right through the smash in the pane, and wags his old head at me like a chattering magpie. That didn't seem to me quite the civil thing to do. I hadn't done no harm to him, so I gives you the office, and lets you know that he was there. But for you to say that he wasn't there and never had been, blimey, that cop's the biscuit. If he wasn't there, all I can say is I ain't here, and my 'orse ain't here, and my cab ain't neither, damn it. The house ain't here, and nothing ain't. He settled himself on his perch with an air of the most extreme ill usage. He had been standing up to tell his tale. That the man was serious was unmistakable, as he himself suggested. What inducement could he have had to tell a lie like that? That he believed himself to have seen what he declared he saw was plain. But, on the other hand, what could have become, in the space of 50 seconds, of his old gent? Atherton put a question. What did he look like, this old gent of yours? Well, that I shouldn't hardly like to say. It wasn't much of his face I could see, only his face and his eyes, and they wasn't pretty. He kept a thing over his head all the time, as if he didn't want too much to be seen. What sort of thing? Why, one of them cloak sort of things, like them Arab blokes used to wear what used to be at Earl's Court Exhibition. You know. This piece of information seemed to interest my companions more than anything he had said before. A burnoose, do you mean? How am I to know what the thing's called? I ain't up in foreign languages. 'Tain't likely. All I know that them Arab blokes what was at Earl's Court used to walk about in them all over the place. Sometimes they wore them over their heads, and sometimes they didn't. In fact, if you'd asked me, instead of trying to make out as I sees double, or things what was only inside my own noodle, or something or other, I should have said this here old gent what I've been telling you about was a Arab bloke. When he gets off his knees to sneak away from the window, I could see that he had his cloak thing, what was over his head, wrapped all around him. Mr. Lessingham turned to me, all quivering with excitement. I believe that what he says is true. Then where can this mysterious old gentleman have got to? Can you suggest an explanation? It is strange, to say the least of it, that the cabman should be the only person to see or hear anything of him. Some devil's trick has been played. I know it. I feel it. My instinct tells me so. I stared. In such a matter, one hardly expects a man of Paul Lessingham's stamp to talk of instinct. Atherton stared too. Then, on a sudden, he burst out. By the Lord, I believe the apostle's right. The whole place reeks to me of hanky-panky. It did as soon as I put my nose inside. In matters of prestigitation, Champnell, we Westerns are among the rudiments. We've everything to learn. Orientals leave us at the post. If their civilization's what we are pleased to call extinct, their conjuring, when you get to know it, is all alive. Oh! He moved towards the door. As he went, he slipped, or seemed to, all but stumbling to his knees. Something tripped me up. What's this? He was stamping on the floor with his foot. "Here's a board loose. Come and lend me a hand, one of you fellas, to get it up. Who knows what mystery's beneath?" I went to his aid. As he said, a board in the floor was loose. His stepping on it unawares had caused his stumble. Together we prized it out of its place, Lessingham standing by and watching us the while. Having removed it, we peered into the cavity it disclosed. There was something there. "Why," cried Atherton, "it's a woman's clothing." End of chapter 37.